The wind cut through everything. David pulled his coat tighter and kept walking. Through Sector 7, checking each abandoned building for equipment that might still work. Most colonists had left Frost Ridge 3 years ago when a main mining operation shut down. Only about 40 people remained, stubborn or broke or both. David was probably both. He kicked snow off a frozen door handle and pulled. The old equipment shed groaned open. Inside sat rusted machinery and broken tools, nothing worth salvaging. He was about to leave when he heard it, a soft whimpering sound like injured animals. David froze. Animals on Frost Ridge were rare. The planet was too cold for most life. He moved deeper into the shed, stepping carefully over fallen beams. The sound came from behind a toppled storage container. He pushed the container aside and stopped breathing. Too small creatures lay curled together in a hollow beneath the floor. They'd scales, wings folded tight against thin bodies, and long necks. Dragons, actual dragons. David had seen pictures of the draken species but never met one in person. These were babies, their scales dull silver and gray instead of the bright colors adult draken usually had. Both were shaking. One made that whimpering sound again. The other had its eyes closed. David knelt slowly. He had no idea if they would bite or scratch or breathe fire, but they looked half dead. Their ribs showed through their scales. Frost covered their wings. One had ice crusted around its nostrils. "Hey," David said softly. "Hey, it's okay." Whimpering, one opened its eyes. They were pale blue, clouded with sickness. It looked at David but did not move. Too weak, probably. The other one did not react at all. David made a decision that would change everything. He stripped off his thermal coat and wrapped both creatures in it. They were cold as metal. He could feel every bone in their bodies as he lifted them. Together they weighed maybe 20 lb. Dragon hatchlings should be much heavier according to what little he knew. The walk back to his habitat took 15 minutes. The twins barely moved in his arms. David kept talking to them, nonsense words just so they would know someone was there. His teeth chattered without the coat. The temperature was 30 below zero. He started running inside his small habitat. David cranked a heater to maximum. He laid both hatchlings on his bed and piled every blanket he owned over them. Then he stood there breathing hard, wondering what the hell he had just done. The colony had about 6 draken families living in the central sector. David had never spoken to any of them. The draken kept to themselves. Proud and formal, everyone knew their reputation. Ancient empire, strict traditions, zero tolerance for disrespect. Finding abandoned draken children made no sense. The species was famous for their devotion to family, yet here were 2 babies left to freeze in an empty building. David grabbed his comm unit and called the colony administrator. "I found 2 draken hatchlings in Sector 7, he said when she answered. "They're in bad shape. Who do I contact?" Silence. "Then you found what?" "Dragon babies. They were freezing to death in an old shed." More silence. "David, are you sure they're draken?" "Pretty sure. Scales, wings, long necks. What else would they be?" "Stay there. I'll make some calls." An hour passed. David tried giving the hatchlings water, but they would not drink. The one with closed eyes still had not moved. The other watched him with those cloudy eyes. David noticed Its breathing was wrong, raspy and wet. Sounding his comm beeped. The administrator again. I contacted the Draken embassy, she said, her voice sounded strange. They confirmed that 2 hatchlings were left behind during an evacuation 6 months ago. 6 months, David felt his anger rising. These babies have been alone for 6 months. The embassy says the situation is complicated, something about family dishonor protocols. They're discussing what to do, discussing they're dying. Right now, David, you need to understand, Draken family law is very strict. Outsiders are not supposed to interfere with their young. You could cause a diplomatic incident. David looked at the 2 small creatures on his bed. The one with closed eyes had started shaking again. He made his second big decision. Tell the embassy I have their hatchlings. Tell them if they want to discuss protocols, they can come discuss it while I keep these babies alive. Otherwise, they can discuss it with themselves. He ended the call. Next hours were busy. David searched his medical supplies and found antibiotics meant for humans. He had no idea if they work on dragons, but doing nothing seemed worse. He mixed the medicine with water and used a dropper to get small amounts into their mouths. The hatchling with closed eyes swallowed reflexively. Good sign. The other one, the whimpering one, managed to look at him again. David touched its head gently. The scales felt like rough stone. You're going to be okay, he said. Both of you, I promise. He had no right to make that promise. He knew nothing about caring for dragons, but he meant it anyway. By midnight, David had fashioned a better heating setup using spare thermal units from his workshop. He positioned both units near the bed so the hatchlings lay in a warm pocket of air. The shaking gradually stopped. Around 3:00 in the morning, the one with closed eyes finally opened them. Dark gray, almost black. It looked at David for a long moment, then it made a sound softer than the whimpering, almost like a purr. David felt something tight in his chest. Loosen. Yeah, he said. You're safe. Now both of you are safe. Outside, the wind screamed across the frozen colony. Snow piled against his habitat walls. David sat on the floor next to the bed, watching 2 abandoned dragon babies sleep, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The answer would prove bigger than he could possibly imagine. 3 days passed before the hatchlings tried to eat. David had been forcing water into their mouths with a dropper, worried they would die of dehydration before anything else killed them. On the 4th morning, the gray-scaled one lifted its head and sniffed the air when David was eating breakfast. David stopped mid-bite. You hungry? The hatchling stared at his food bar. Its nostrils flared. David broke off a piece and held it out carefully. Sharp little teeth snatched it from his fingers. The hatchling chewed once, twice, then swallowed. It immediately opened its mouth for more. Okay, David laughed. Let's not make you sick. He fed them both slowly, tiny pieces at a time. The silver-scaled one took longer to wake up, but eventually ate too. Their eyes got brighter with each bite. By afternoon, both were sitting up. By evening, they were standing on shaky legs. David watched them wobble around his small habitat, bumping into furniture, exploring everything with their noses. They were curious about his boots, his tools, the humming refrigerator. The gray one tried to bite a chair leg. The silver one found David's spare socks and got tangled in Them, you two are trouble, David said. But he was smiling. That night the gray hatchling crawled into bed next to David and fell asleep against his side. The silver one followed. They were still, cold, their body temperature lower than it should be. David did not mind sharing his warmth. In the morning, his comm unit buzzed with an incoming call. Official frequency, David answered. This is Magistrate Krell of the Draken Council, said a deep voice. You are harboring hatchlings that belong to our people. Harboring, I rescued them. They were dying. The circumstances of their abandonment are internal Draken matters. You had no authority to intervene. David felt anger building. So what was I supposed to do? Leave them to freeze? The hatchlings were born during the void moon cycle. Their parents brought dishonor to their clan. Proper protocols require. I don't care about your protocols, David interrupted. I care about two babies who were left alone for 6 months. Silence on the line. Then you do not understand our ways, human. Those hatchlings carry a curse. They cannot be raised among our people. Then I'll raise them. That is not acceptable. They must be returned. Returned where? To another empty building. That is not your concern. We will send a delegation to retrieve them. Within the week, you will surrender them. At that time, the call ended. David sat staring at his comm unit. The two hatchlings were wrestling on the floor, making chirping sounds. They'd started making noise the previous day. Little chirps and trills. It was the sound of baby dragons playing that he accessed the colony database and searched for information on Draken family law. What he found made him sick. The void moon cycle was considered cursed by traditional Draken society. Any hatchlings born during that time were seen as bad omens. Families who kept such hatchlings faced social exile. Most parents chose exile over abandoning their children, but some chose differently. David found legal precedents. If the hatchlings were officially considered abandoned property rather than family members, colonial salvage law might apply. It was a thin argument, but it was something that he called a lawyer on one of the inner colonies, named Ruth Park, who specialized in interspecies cases. She listened to his story without interrupting. This is messy, she said. Finally, the Draken will argue you kidnapped their young, will argue they were abandoned and you rescued them. Under Good Samaritan protocols, can we win? Maybe, but even if we win legally, you understand what you're taking on. Those hatchlings will grow. Dragons live 200 years. They need special diets, specific environments, and you'll be making enemies of the entire Draken Council. David looked at the two babies. The gray one was trying to climb onto his desk. The silver one was chewing on his boot again. I'm already their enemy. If they expect me to hand over kids to die, Ruth made a sound that might have been approval. Okay, I'll file the paperwork. Don't let anyone take those hatchlings until we get a hearing. The week passed quickly. David learned more about the twins every day. The gray one was bold, always exploring, always testing boundaries. The silver one was quieter, more cautious, but fiercely protective of its sibling. When David tried to pick up the gray one for a medical check, the silver one positioned itself between them and hissed, "Easy." David said, "I'm not going to hurt anyone." The silver one hissed again, but let him pass. David started calling them by simple names, not the complex Draken Titles they would never receive. Gray one became smoke for his dark. Scale, the silver one became ash for a lighter coloring, both responded to the names within 2 days. On the 8th day, a shuttle landed at the colony. 3 Draken elders emerged wearing ceremonial armor that gleamed even in Frost Ridge's weak sunlight. They were massive, 8 ft tall with scales in deep reds and blacks. Their eyes were gold. David met them at the colony administration building with Ruth appearing via hologram. The lead elder, Magistrate Krell, looked at David with obvious disdain. You will produce the hatchlings immediately, Krell said. Not until we establish their legal status. Ruth replied, their status is clear. They are Draken young, born to Draken parents. This human has no claim. Their parents abandoned them 6 months ago. That changes things. Krell's eyes narrowed. We do not recognize human law over our family matters. You'll recognize it in a colonial court, Ruth said, which is where this is heading. The meeting went nowhere. The elders demanded. Ruth argued. David stayed quiet, watching these massive creatures who wanted to take smoke and ash back to nothing. Finally, Krell turned to David directly. You understand that continuing this path means war between you and our people. Your life will become very difficult. Human, David met those gold eyes. Then it gets difficult. I'm not giving them up. Krell's face twisted with rage. The other 2 elders had to physically restrain him. They left, making threats, promising legal action, promising consequences. David went home to his habitat. Smoke and ash rushed to him, chirping excitedly. They had learned to recognize his footsteps. Ash breathed out a tiny puff of smoke. Her first attempt at fire. Smoke tried to, but only managed a small spark. David knelt and let both of them climb onto him, their small claws digging into his shirt. It's us against everyone, he told them, but we're going to be okay. He hoped he was right. Winter deepened. The temperature dropped to 40 below. David rigged extra heaters in his habitat because smoke and ash were still too small to generate proper body heat. They grew fast though. Within a month they doubled in size. Within 2 months they reached David's waist. They followed him everywhere. When David went to work checking equipment, both dragons trotted behind him through the snow. When he ate, they pressed against his legs, begging for scraps. When he slept, they curled around him like living blankets. The legal battle dragged on. Ruth filed motions. The Draken Council filed counter motions. Everything moved slowly through the colonial court system. Meanwhile, the council spread word through their diplomatic channels. David Cole was a criminal who stole Draken children. He was dangerous. He should be arrested. Most colonists ignored the propaganda. They saw David every day, walking through the settlement with 2 baby dragons trailing behind. They saw smoke trying to catch snowflakes on his tongue. They saw Ash carefully picking up David's dropped tools with her claws. Hard to see criminals in that picture, but some colonists worried. A man named Phillips filed a formal complaint with the administrator. Dragons were predators, he argued. They could hurt someone. Children might get scared. The administrator, a tired woman named Sandra Wung, called David to her office. Phillips wants the dragons removed, she said. He's getting other people nervous. Smoke and ash have never hurt anyone. No, I'm not siding with Phillips. I'm warning you that this might get harder. David ran a hand through his hair. How much harder can it get? 2 days later, the worst storm in Frost Ridge history hit the colony. Wind speeds reached 90 mph. Snow fell so thick people could not see 5 ft ahead. Power failed in sectors 2 and 4. The emergency sirens wailed. David was in his habitat with smoke and ash when Sandra's voice came over the emergency channel. All available personnel report to Sector 2. We have families trapped without heat. I repeat, all available personnel to Sector 2 immediately. David grabbed his coat. Smoke and ash stood up alert. You two stay here, David said. Both dragons moved toward the door. No, it's too dangerous. Ash made a low rumbling sound. Smoke positioned himself next to his sister. Neither moved back. David looked at them. They were 4 months old now, roughly the size of large dogs. Their scales had brightened with good nutrition. Their eyes were sharp and intelligent. If you come, you do exactly what I say. Understood. Both dragons bobbed their heads. They went out into the storm together. Sector 2 was chaos. 3 family habitats had lost power completely. The backup generators were frozen. Children were crying. Adults were trying to keep everyone calm, but the temperature inside the habitats was already dropping. David found Sandra trying to manually restart a generator. Her hands were shaking from cold. Fuel line is frozen solid, she shouted over the wind. We need heat to thaw it, but we need the generator to produce heat. David looked at smoke and ash. They looked back at him. How hot do you need it? He asked Sandra. What? David knelt next to the twins. Can you breathe fire on this? He pointed at the frozen fuel line. Smoke stepped forward. Immediately, he took a deep breath and exhaled. Flame erupted from his mouth, bright orange and focused. The ice on the fuel line began to melt. Sandra stared. Holy! Ash joined her brother. 2 streams of fire hit the fuel line. Within minutes, the ice was gone. David quickly connected the line and pulled the generator start cord. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Heat began flowing into the first habitat. 2 more habitats, Sandra said. Already moving. Can they do it again? They could. Smoke and ash worked through the storm, breathing fire on frozen equipment, thawing pipes, warming trapped families. They were tireless. When one got tired, the other took over. They moved through blinding snow like it was nothing, their dragon senses guiding them where human eyes failed. By wide dawn, all 3 habitats were warm. All 12 people trapped inside were safe. Word spread fast. The dragons everyone was worried about had saved lives. Phillips, who filed the complaint, personally thanked David. His daughter had been in one of those habitats. I was wrong, Phillips said. I'm sorry. David nodded. Fear makes people stupid sometimes. We all do it. The colony's view of smoke and ash changed overnight. People who had been nervous started waving when they saw the twins. Children asked if they could pet the dragons. Merchants started saving meat scraps for them. But the biggest change came 3 days after the storm. David received a coded message on a private channel. No sender information, just text. What you did during the storm was witnessed. Not all Draken agree with the council. Many of us believe the old ways are wrong. Your compassion honors both species. The hatchlings chose well. Stay strong. You are not alone. David read it 3 times. Somewhere in Draken space, someone was watching. Someone approved. He called Ruth and told her about the message. That's huge, she said. It means there's internal dissent. The council's position isn't universal. Does it help us legally? Maybe, if we can get Draken testimony that the twins were truly abandoned, that the council's cultural justification is disputed. We have a much stronger case. Will anyone actually testify? I don't know, but someone sent you that message for a reason. That night David sat with Smoke and Ash, watching the stars through his habitat window. Both dragons had grown again. Smoke was developing small horns. Ash's wing membranes were getting stronger. You two are causing quite a stir, David said. Ash made a contented rumble and rested her head on David's lap. Smoke curled up on his other side. They had been together for months. It felt like forever. David could barely remember life before finding two frozen hatchlings in an abandoned shed. Could barely remember sleeping alone, eating alone, living alone. We're family now, he said quietly. Whatever happens, we're family. Both dragons chirped in agreement. Outside the stars burned cold and distant, but inside the small habitat, three beings from two different worlds kept each other warm against the universe's indifference. Spring arrived slowly on Frost Ridge. The temperatures climbed to 20 below zero, which felt tropical after the winter. David started taking Smoke and Ash on longer walks beyond the colony perimeter. They needed exercise. At 6 months old, they were nearly as tall as David, with powerful legs and growing wings. Smoke could fly short distances now, hopping from building to building. Ash was more cautious, testing her wings with small jumps. David worried about them flying too far and getting lost, but they always stayed close, always came when he called. That he taught them other things too, how to read basic human writing, how to use tools despite their claws, simple mathematics using stones and scratches in the dirt. They learned faster than any child David had ever known. In return, the twins taught David about dragon senses, how they could smell water under frozen ground, how they could hear machinery failing before it broke, how they could sense temperature changes hours before they happened. You're better than any diagnostic equipment the colony has, David told them one afternoon. Smoke puffed out his chest proudly. Ash just rolled her eyes, a gesture she had learned from watching David. The court hearing was scheduled for late spring. Ruth was confident but cautious. The Draken Council had hired expensive lawyers. They were preparing arguments about cultural sovereignty, about the sanctity of their family structures, about humans interfering in matters they did not understand. They'll make you look like a kidnapper, Ruth warned. They'll say you stole children for your own purposes. Let them say it. The truth is simple. I found dying babies and kept them alive. Simple isn't always enough. In court, David knew she was right, but he also knew he would not give up Smoke and Ash, not to the council, not to anyone. Then something unexpected happened. That a supply ship arrived from the inner colony's routine delivery, but one passenger got off who was not routine. Young Draken female, barely into adulthood, with bright green scales and nervous eyes. She asked for David by name. They met in a private room at the colony administration building. The young Draken was tall, maybe 7 feet, but she held herself small, scared. My name is Sarah, she said in accented human standard. I came to see the hatchlings. Everyone is talking about. Why? Because my parents wanted to abandon my younger brother. He was born during the void. Moon 2, I helped them escape instead. We've been hiding for 3 years. David leaned forward. Where's your brother? Now safe, on a mining station where no one asks questions, but he should not have to hide. None of the void. Moon hatchlings should. There are others. Many others, scattered across the colonies, hiding with sympathetic families, living under false names. Council pretends we do not exist, but we do. Sarah pulled out a data chip. These are testimonies from 15 Draken families who rejected the old ways, parents who kept their void moon children despite the consequences. They're willing to testify that the council's position is cultural extremism, not universal Draken belief. David took the chip carefully. This could change everything. That's why I brought it. What you're doing with the twins, it's giving others courage. If you win, if you prove that someone can stand up to the council, more families will stop hiding. What if I lose? Sarah's eyes darkened. Then we keep hiding and more hatchlings die alone in places like Sector 7. David gave the chip to Ruth immediately. She reviewed the testimonies and called back within hours, her voice excited. This is gold. Actual Draken citizens contradicting the council's claim that all their people support these abandonment protocols. It completely undermines their cultural sovereignty argument. Will the court accept it? They have to. These are legitimate witnesses willing to testify under oath. The news leaked fast. Within days, galactic media picked up the story. Human networks ran headlines. Draken families defy ancient council to support human guardian. Hidden community of void moon dragons revealed. Cultural rift divides Draken empire. A journalist from a major network came to Frost Ridge. A human woman named Lisa Chan. She interviewed David, Sandra, several colonists. Then she asked to interview Smoke and Ash. David was skeptical. They're still young. They don't really understand human politics. Let me try, Lisa said. She set up cameras in David's habitat. Smoke and Ash were curious about the equipment, sniffing everything. Lisa sat on the floor at their level. Can you understand me? She asked. Both dragons nodded. I want to ask about David, about the human who found you. What is he to you? Ash looked at Smoke. Smoke looked at David. Then Smoke did something David had never heard before. The dragon spoke in human language. Father, Smoke said. The word rough and accented but clear. He is our father. David's breath caught. Ash nodded. Father found us, saved us, taught us. He is our father. We are his children. Lisa's eyes were wide. You consider yourselves as family? Yes, both dragons said together. The interview went viral. Across human space, footage of 2 young dragons clearly stating that a human was their father, that they chose him as family, spread through every network. Billions of people watched. The Draken Council issued a statement calling it propaganda, but many Draken citizens, especially younger ones, saw something different. They saw children who loved their father regardless of species. They saw a bond that made a mockery of the old honor codes. Protests started on Draken homeworlds. Young Draken demanded reform. Elder Draken argued for tradition. The empire split into factions almost overnight. Back on Frost Ridge, David sat with Smoke and Ash, trying to process what was happening. You call me father, he said quietly. You are, Smoke replied, his human language. Getting better each time he used it, not Draken father, not human father, just father. Ash pressed against David's side. Does it upset you? No, David wrapped his arms around both of them. It's the greatest honor anyone has ever given me. That night David received another coded message. The hearing is now being watched by every government in the galaxy. Win or lose, you have already changed everything. The council can never go back to the old ways. Thank you for your courage. David looked at his two children, one gray, one silver, both curled up and sleeping peacefully. Courage, the message said, but David did not feel courageous. He just felt like a father protecting his kids. Maybe that was the same thing. The tribunal convened on the orbital station above Frost Ridge, neutral ground they called it, a place where neither human nor Draken law dominated. Representatives from a dozen species came to observe. This case had become bigger than one human and two dragons. It had become a test of cultural sovereignty versus individual rights. David wore his only good shirt. Smoke and Ash wore nothing but their scales, now gleaming with health. Both dragons had reached their juvenile stage at 8 months old. They stood 6 feet tall with fully developed wings and the intelligence of human teenagers. Ruth met them at the station. Doc, ready? No, David admitted. Good. Nervous people make careful choices. She looked at Smoke and Ash. You two know what to do. Both dragons nodded. They had practiced their testimony for weeks. The tribunal chamber was massive, designed to accommodate large species. The 3 judges sat on an elevated platform, one human, one Draken, one from an insectoid species. Neutral was possible given the circumstances. The Draken Council's lawyers went first. They argued for 2 hours. David listened as they painted him as a criminal, cultural vandal, a human who thought he knew better than ancient tradition. They showed images of Draken family ceremonies, spoke of bonds that stretched back millennia, claimed that allowing humans to raise Draken young would destroy their species' identity. The lead lawyer, a massive Draken with crimson scales, pointed at Smoke and Ash. Those hatchlings are being raised as humans. They eat human food, speak human language, live by human customs. They have been stolen from their heritage. Ruth stood for the defense. She presented the testimonies from Sarah and the 15 families. She showed medical records proving Smoke and Ash had been hours from death when David found them. She presented the coded messages from Draken citizens supporting David's action. The council claims universal cultural support, Ruth said, but we have evidence of significant internal dissent. Many Draken believe the void moon protocols are archaic and cruel. This is not about human interference. This is about saving children's lives when their own society abandoned them. The tribunal listened carefully. The human judge seemed sympathetic. The Chittick judge was harder to read, her compound eyes reflecting light. Strangely, the Draken judge, an elderly male with gray scales, watched everything with an unreadable expression. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Smoke and Ash would testify. Both dragons approached the witness platform. Smoke went first. His human language had improved dramatically over the past months. I was dying, Smoke said, his voice clear. Despite the accent, my sister and I were left in the building with no heat, no food, no water. We waited for our Parents, they never came. We waited for anyone from our species. No one came. He paused, looking directly at the Draken judge. Then David found us. He could have walked away. We were not his species, not his responsibility, but he wrapped us in his coat and carried us home. He fed us from his own rations. He gave us his bed. He protected us when the council wanted to take us back. Take you back where? The human judge asked. Nowhere, Smoke said flatly. The council wanted us returned to where we were found, to be properly, to not embarrass them further. Murmurs filled the chamber. The crimson lawyer stood. That is a mischaracterization. Is it? Ash cut him off. She had been quiet until now. You told David that proper protocols required you to let nature take its course. Your words. We heard the recording. The lawyer's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Ash continued. David taught us to read, to think, to survive. He taught us about honor by showing it, not just speaking it. When a storm came, he brought us to help save families. Even though it was dangerous, he treats us as equals, as children worthy of love and education. But he is not Draken. The Draken judge said, speaking for the first time. How can he teach you your own culture? Ash looked at the elderly dragon. What culture? The culture that says we should die because we were born on the wrong night. The culture that values superstition over children's lives. Silence. David taught us there's honor in compassion, Ash said quietly, in protecting the weak, in standing up to power when power is wrong, if that is human culture instead of Draken culture. Then I am proud to learn it more. Murmurs. Several observers were openly weeping. Smoke stepped forward. We know we're dragons. We know our biology, our capabilities, but David is our father. That is our choice. That is our truth. The testimony ended. The tribunal recessed for deliberation. David sat with Smoke and Ash in a waiting room, not speaking. There was nothing left to say. Everything was out of their hands. Now Ruth paced. I think it went well. The judges seemed moved. Seemed. David said, it's all we can ask for. 2 hours later, they were called back. The chamber was packed, every seat filled. The galactic media had cameras everywhere. The 3 judges entered. The Draken judge spoke first, which was unusual. His voice was heavy. This case has forced us to examine questions we would rather avoid. What is culture? What is family? When do traditional values become tools of cruelty? He looked at the Draken Council's lawyers. The council argues for cultural sovereignty. They claim the right to enforce their traditions without outside interference. Normally this tribunal would agree, but this case is different. The judge gestured to Smoke and Ash. These are not hatchlings anymore. They are juveniles, old enough under Draken law to have voices, old enough to choose, and they have chosen. He paused. The evidence shows they were truly abandoned, not temporarily placed, not hidden for safety, abandoned it to die. No cultural tradition justifies child murder. That is not sovereignty. That is barbarism. The crimson lawyer tried to stand. The Chittick judge waved him down. We have reached a decision. The human judge said, by unanimous vote, we rule that David Cole acted within moral and legal rights when he rescued these hatchlings. They were abandoned property under colonial law. He claimed them through salvage protocols. His claim is valid. Relief washed through David. Furthermore, the Draken judge continued, we recognize The bond between guardian and wards. David Cole is granted full parental rights until Smoke and Ash reach adulthood. The Draken Council is ordered to cease all interference. Cheers erupted in the chamber. Smoke and Ash rushed to David, their tails whipping with excitement. "We won," Ash said as if she could not believe it. "We won," David repeated, holding both his children close. But the Draken judge was not finished. "However, we also censure the Draken Council for child endangerment. We recommend immediate reform of Void Moon protocols. We recommend investigation of other potentially abandoned hatchlings." The Crimson lawyer was shaking with rage. But the ruling was final. That night in their quarters on the station, David and his children watched news reports. Verdict was everywhere. Protests on Draken worlds had turned into celebrations. Reform movements were gaining power. "You two changed a civilization," David said. "We survived," Smoke corrected. "You changed a civilization by refusing to let us die." Fair point. 1 year after the tribunal ruling, Frost Ridge was unrecognizable. What had been a dying colony was now a thriving hub. People came from across the galaxy to see the place where everything changed, where a human refused to let dragon children die, where family formed that broke every cultural boundary. David still lived in a small habitat, though Sandra had offered him bigger quarters many times. He liked the small space. It felt safe. Besides, Smoke and Ash had built their own dwelling next door, a modified warehouse with high ceilings for their wings. They were almost full-grown now. Magnificent creatures with scales that caught the light. Smoke's gray had deepened to charcoal black. Ash's silver had brightened to near white. Both could fly for hours, hunt for their own food, and speak 3 languages fluently, but they still came to David's habitat every morning for breakfast. "You two don't need me cooking for you anymore," David said, watching them devour eggs and protein bars. "Dragons could eat almost anything. Need and want are different." Ash said. She had become a philosopher of the two. Smoke just grunted and kept eating. The changes went beyond Frost Ridge. The Draken Council had dissolved after the trial. A new government formed, led by younger Draken, who rejected the old honor codes. They established shelters for Void Moon hatchlings. They prosecuted parents who abandoned their children. They began the slow work of cultural transformation. Sandra had become a spokesperson for the reform movement. She visited Frost Ridge regularly, bringing news from Draken worlds. 53 hatchlings have been recovered from hiding, she told David during her latest visit, all being reunited with families who want them. Another 20 were found abandoned in remote locations. They're being cared for now. "That's good," David said. "Good. It's a revolution. You started a revolution by being stubborn and kind." David shrugged. He had never been comfortable with the hero worship that followed the trial. He was just a guy who found some kids and took care of them. But the galaxy saw something bigger. They saw proof that compassion could cross any boundary. That family was choice, not just blood. That one person's actions could challenge empires. Schools taught the story. Diplomats cited it in negotiations. Parents of all species told their children about the human and his dragon. Kids, David found it all slightly embarrassing. "You could travel," Ruth said during one of her visits. She had Become a good friend over the past year. Give speeches, write a book, you're famous now. I have work to do here. David said, equipment doesn't fix itself. Ruth laughed, still the same stubborn maintenance worker. Worked out okay so far. One afternoon while David was replacing solar panels on the colony's outer wall, he noticed a small figure approaching across the snow. Another draken, but tiny, a hatchling. David climbed down and waited. Hatchling came closer, moving cautiously. Behind it walked a draken. Female, keeping distance but watching carefully. The hatchling stopped a few feet away. Its scales were pale yellow, still soft with youth. Its eyes were wide and scared. Are you David? The hatchling asked in barely understandable human standard. I am. Are you the one who saved the Void Moon dragons? I found them, yes, and helped them. Hatchling looked back at the female, who nodded encouragement. It turned back to David. I am Void Moon too, born in the cursed cycle. My mother wants to keep me, but our clan is angry. They say bad things. They want us to leave. David's chest tightened. So you came here. Mother said you might help. She said you protect children no matter what species they are. The female approached now, her movements careful. She was young, maybe barely into adulthood herself. Her scales were deep green, dull from stress. I have nowhere else to go, she said. My mate abandoned us. My family disowned me. I heard the stories about this place, about acceptance. David looked at the hatchling, saw the fear in its eye, saw himself a year ago finding smoke and ash in that frozen shed. What's your name? He asked the hatchling. Frost. Frost, that's a good name. David knelt to the hatchling's level. Are you hungry? Frost nodded. Come on then. Let's get you both some food. He led them to his habitat. Smoke and ash were inside, working on reading lessons. Both looked up when the door opened. We have guests, David said. Frost and her mother need help. Smoke and ash immediately made space, brought out extra food, made the kind of welcoming gestures that came naturally to them. Now, the young mother started crying with relief. Over the next weeks, more arrived, a Draken couple with twin Void Moon hatchlings, a single father whose mate had died, leaving him with 3 children. A clan would not accept an elderly Draken protecting her grandson. They all came to Frostridge, all asking for help, all hoping the human who saved dragons would save them. 2. David worked with Sandra to expand housing. They converted old warehouses into family dwellings, set up schools where Draken and human children learn. Together, established support networks. Frostridge became a sanctuary. Smoke and ash helped with everything. They taught young hatchlings to fly, translated between species, showed by example that Void Moon dragons could thrive. One evening, David stood on a hill overlooking the expanded colony. Dozens of habitats now filled with families of mixed species, children playing in the snow regardless of whether they had scales or skin, parents sharing meals and stories. Ash joined him on the hill, her white scales luminous in the twilight. Thinking deep thoughts, she asked, just remembering how quiet it used to be here. Miss the quiet? David smiled, not even a little bit. Smoke landed beside them, showering them with snow. Mother Sarah is visiting next week. She wants to establish a formal exchange program. Draken students studying human culture. Mother Sarah. David raised an eyebrow. She told us to Call her that, said if he could be father to dragons, she can be mother too. The movement, David laughed, family kept expanding in unexpected ways. They sat together watching the colony lights come on one by one. David thought about how everything had started, two frozen hatchlings in a shed, a simple choice to not walk away. Do you ever regret it? Ash asked quietly. Your life was simpler before us. David put his arms around both his children. They were too big for him to fully embrace now, but they leaned into the gesture anyway. Simple isn't always better, he said. You too taught me that. Below them, Frost was learning to fly with help from older hatchlings. The young dragon stumbled, fell, tried again. Children cheered each attempt. We should go help, Smoke said. Yeah, David agreed, we should. They walked down the hill together, father and children, toward the noise and light and messy, beautiful chaos of family. Real family, chosen family, the kind that mattered most.